We're frequently told that Jesus was silent about homosexuality, and therefore when the church opposes it, it's much ado about nothing. It's just prejudice. But is it true? Was Jesus really silent about homosexuality? I'd like to make 4 points today. First of all, Jesus is the God-man, the second person of the Trinity. When Thomas is confronted by the risen Jesus, how does he respond? He says, "My Lord and my God." He confesses Jesus as the God whom he worships. And moreover, when the New Testament refers to Jesus in various places, it quotes from the Old Testament or cites various Old Testament passages which refer to Yahweh, which refer to the God of Israel, and it applies those passages to Jesus. Jesus is the Yahweh of the Old Testament. Now this means that whatever the Word of God says generally, Jesus says. He has spoken it in His Word. It is His voice. This means that what Paul says in Romans 1, for example, is the word of Jesus. What Paul says, he says as the apostle of Jesus. Jesus, Shaliach, his personal representative. He speaks on behalf of the Lord, and the Lord indeed speaks through him. Romans 1, which is so very stridently opposed to homosexual practice, is in fact the word of Jesus. Second, again, Jesus is the God-man, the second person of the Trinity. Just prior to the judgment on Sodom, 3 men appeared to Abraham, and 2 of them turned out to be angels, and they went down into Sodom and met with Lot, the nephew of Abraham. Well, who is the third, and where was he? Well, he was the revelation of Yahweh himself. He is the one who spoke to Abraham in Genesis 18 and told him what he was going to do to Sodom and Gomorrah. And he is the one, therefore, who has this negotiation with Abraham. Abraham says to him, "Well, if there are 40 people in the city who are righteous, you surely won't destroy it, will you? You wouldn't destroy the righteous with the wicked." And he says, "If there are 40, I will leave it alone." And then Abraham says, "Well, what about 30? And Yahweh says, "If there are 30, I'll leave it alone." And he gets him down. He keeps negotiating until he finally says, "What about 10? And Yahweh says, "If there are just 10 righteous men in the city, I will not destroy it." This is Yahweh. This is the revelation of the second person of the Trinity. Well then, when the actual judgment occurs, where is he? What we find in Genesis 19:24 is that Yahweh, who is on earth, rained sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from Yahweh out of heaven. So there's this distinction in the Trinity of the revelation of Yahweh upon the earth and Yahweh in heaven. And the revelation of Yahweh on the earth is always the Son of God, which is to say, the person who will be incarnate as Jesus. And he is the one directing the fire and sulfur from heaven, from Yahweh. He is the one who executes judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Therefore, it is simply wrong to say Jesus is silent. Jesus is not silent about homosexuality. Well, third, what about Jesus' ministry itself? Specifically, in his incarnation, was he silent about the subject? Well, only if by silent we mean he did not speak to it directly and explicitly, specifically. But arguments from silence are only meaningful if we do not expect silence, if it's something strange. If we expect otherwise, then silence is significant. It's the classic case of the story of the dog who did not bark. You know, if you have a dog who never barks at his family, but always barks at everybody else, and something is stolen from the house, but the dog didn't bark, well, that's significant. Is this a burglary investigation, or is it an inside job? There's significance in the silence. But if the dog never barks, big deal. He didn't bark. There's no significance at all. So it is with regard to the supposed silence of Jesus on this subject. In the case of Jesus, his ministry was to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, for whom in the first century homosexuality was not a live option. It wasn't widespread. And so the reason he did not address homosexuality specifically and directly is for the same reason that he did not address bestiality or pedophilia. It wasn't a live option. There are all manner of sins, sexual and otherwise, that he didn't talk about, and it's not because they're not important, and it's not because they're not sins. It's because he was attending to the sins of his audience and his context. He wasn't going around talking about stuff in the abstract. It doesn't mean he cares about none of those things. It meant it wasn't relevant to his hearers at the time. Well then, fourth, if we are saying more by Jesus was silent than he didn't talk about it directly and specifically, then we are simply wrong. On the matter of the fundamentals of human sexuality, he is 100% in accord with Moses. And he says straightforwardly that God created man, male and female. On the matter of the fundamentals of human sexuality, he is 100% in accord with Moses. When the Pharisees approach him on the matter of divorce, his response typifies this. He says that in the beginning, God created human beings, male and female, and they shall be one flesh. In other words, he upholds the way that he himself has created the world, and specifically the way he himself has created male and female as sexual counterparts. And he makes that way he has created things solely normative. One male, one female. Not one male, and then a female, and maybe another female. Not one male and three females, and not one male, or one female and one female. One male, one female. And the male and female aspect of this teaching is just as critical as is the one aspect of this teaching. The biblical norm, the Jesus norm, does not occur with a male and a male. It does not occur with a female and a female. That is not the way that God has created things from the beginning. Furthermore, Jesus speaks repeatedly against porneia, which is a Greek term that is frequently translated as fornication. This term doesn't simply mean premarital sex. It refers to a broad range of sins that is forbidden in passages like Leviticus 19. It would include adultery, homosexuality, and all those things that God said, no, this is prohibited. You may not have sexual activity in this way. Therefore, Jesus certainly was not silent about homosexuality. He may not have brought up the subject narrowly and specifically, certainly, but he affirmed the law's prohibitions against porneia, against the whole sweep of sexual sins that are against God's design in creation. Jesus, therefore, was not silent about homosexuality after all. He is the incarnation of Yahweh, and he is the same God who gave laws against it. He is the same God who has always prohibited sexual activity outside of marital intercourse between a male and a female. So let's stop pretending, please, that Jesus was silent about homosexuality or was indifferent about it or even positive toward it. There is only one form of sexual activity he sanctions, the marital union between a man and a woman. That's it, period. If you don't like his rules, so be it. But let's not pretend it's about honoring Jesus. Let's not pretend he sides with you. You are at war against the rule of God. On the matter of homosexuality, Jesus has spoken.